All right. Well, I'm so glad to be among friends, and what a delight it is to see Jill Glover here. She's like part of Wise County Conservatives? Okay, awesome. That is so awesome. I didn't even know I was in Jill's like territory here. This is wonderful. Known her for a long time. You guys are in good hands with her, and very, very accurate. Because as you know, it's hard to get good, accurate information about what's really happening, and she's definitely your source for that, for a lot of us, in fact. But some of you might be wondering, you can go ahead and go to my first slide. How did I end up here? I'm a homeschool mom of 10 children. I have one of them here, my Madeline over here, who's 13. 6 girls, 4 boys, oldest 26, the youngest is 6. Homeschool them all, so it is a very busy household at our house. And I kind of fell into this. I've always been very politically engaged. I've lived in 2 other states. Please don't hold it against me that I was born and raised in California. We truly did get to Texas as fast as we could. We've been here almost 20 years already, so half my kids were born in Texas, so surely that counts for something, doesn't it? Come on. So anyway, we lived just north in the hill country. We called it the front porch of the hill country, just above San Antonio, north central San Antonio. It was called a little town of Spring Branch, not the one near Houston. This is Spring Branch near Bulverde, halfway in between Bernie and New Braunfels, and that's where most of my kids were raised. And then we recently moved out to the Kerrville area, so now we're in Kerr County. We also, like I didn't have enough to do with Texans Uniting for Reform and Freedom, we call it TURF for short. I also have a political action committee called Texans for Toll-Free Highways, and those are 2 statewide groups, and we're going to talk about those things tonight. But we also ended up getting roped in. If you know Matt and Angela from the Fredericksburg Tea Party, then you know that they've been desperately wanting to get a group started in the Kerrville area, so now we're also part of We the People, Liberty in Action, trying to get our local group started on local issues in the Kerr County area. So that's been another thing that's been on my plate lately. But what happened initially to get me involved in this freedom to travel and tolling issue, because that's what the name of our political action committee is, Texans for Toll-Free Highways. How many of you remember Rick Perry's big legacy project, the Trans-Texas Corridor? Any of you remember that? Oh, come on, there has to be some hands. Do you all remember? It's not that long ago. Okay, well, that was when he was trying to hand over a whole bunch of our Texas public roadways to these private foreign corporations. And unfortunately, several of them got away from us, even though we fought it. And some of them you're seeing today in the Metroplex. Parts of I-35 West, where that 166 car pileup, what was it, 160? I want to say it was that many. It was a huge, you remember during the ice storm. All of that happened on that portion of the highway that is operated by a foreign entity that obviously doesn't know how to de-ice our roads like TxDOT does. Then you've got parts of I-35 on the Dallas side. You've also got 635 is the big crown jewel for Cintra, a Spanish firm. And then you've also got the North Tarrant Express, which is a series of really 3 or 4 roadways. You've got Chisholm Trail, part of that as well. All of that was under one bid given to one company, including the one that went bankrupt in less than 3 years, which was State Highway 130 around Austin. That was also operated originally by Cintra, went bankrupt in less than 3 years. Just note that in your mind. Every single one of those projects I just named, all controlled by the same company, Cintra. One. And I don't think that was by accident. Any of you who knows about Texas politics, unfortunately, you know the good, bad, and the ugly with Jill being around, is they had lobbyists. One of the lobbyists, his name was Dan Shelley. He worked for Cintra, lobbied hard to get the Trans-Texas Corridor and all of these types of contracts passed into Texas law, then went to work for Rick Perry in the 2003 legislative session, worked for the governor's office to get the actual code changed to allow these types of things to occur, 50-year deals, and then after that session was over, goes back to work for Cintra. And all the contracts that were currently signed in the state of Texas were under Cintra. When they were first signed. So that's not by accident, folks. So that's what got me involved in all of this, because in San Antonio, I didn't live there, but that was kind of my lifeline to things, kind of like Fort Worth probably is to y'all here in Decatur. But it was literally going to take our existing roadway and turn it into a foreign-owned toll road. Like the lanes I've already drive on today for free. Imagine them coming out here and tolling every single lane you drive on now and having to pay homage to a foreign entity. If you talk to the folks on the North Tarrant Express and on the 635 in Dallas, it exceeds $4 a mile in peak hours. $4 in tolls. So for a family on basically a single income, we have a small business. I'm a stay-at-home mom, obviously, with my kiddos. So imagine what that would do to our family budget every time we had to go into San Antonio, paying $5, $8, $10, $12. Okay, so this was like DEFCON 5 urgency for us because we were like, what are we going to do? So I got involved and started fighting all of this crazy stuff. Well, now we have a whole new brave new world to worry about when we have the Biden administration and the left coming after our roads. Tolling was just one of the first tools they used to try and control our freedom to travel. Now, I don't think it was that way initially under Rick Perry's watch. I think he just was involved a little too deep in some crony capitalism. And he thought that tolls were a way to get more money for roads without having to say they raised your taxes, which they would if they had to raise the gas tax. Now we're seeing the left grab hold of that tool and many others to now steal your freedom to travel. So that's how we got here in part. So here's what's happening. They're using our freedom to travel is under assault, and they're going to, instead of unbridled toll taxes, that was the first problem. Now we're seeing California-style road diet being imposed on every corner of the state. You definitely see it once you hit the Metroplex. Radical environmental agenda that is driving these anti-car policies. Now we're seeing, you've all heard it with CRT, they have it in transportation too. Diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives being forced into our transportation decision-making. We had probably close to a dozen bills last session filed to do that very thing. To force who gets the transportation gas tax dollars in your communities based on diversity, equity, and inclusion and social justice instead of on actual taxpayers and sound, transportation decision making. Also, there's a systematic effort to purposely shrink our road capacity in order to give that road capacity to dedicated bus lanes, bike lanes, or mass transit. So next slide. So tolls were initially used as a means of control. We saw it really clearly in Fairfax, Virginia. This was on a project on I-95. It's what goes into D.C., and so there's a lot of government workers that use this roadway and depend on it every day. They came in and decided to toll existing lanes as well as the new lanes that they had put in on that roadway. And it literally costs $44 one way in tolls every day to get into and out of DC if you're someone that lives in that area. Well, they had so many people diverting off of that highway onto the neighborhood side streets to avoid having to pay that, because guess what? People can't pay it. They just think they can charge whatever they want because they have a monopoly on these roads, but ultimately that's not the way it works. So now they decided to make it a zone where during certain hours of the day, they can issue you a ticket if you're in that neighborhood without the government's permission. And notice the ticket price actually costs you more than paying the tolls both ways to work. So this is what they called it: failure to obey a highway sign penalty on drivers who turn onto a neighborhood road without a permit during designated times. These permits are only granted to the owners of homes within the primary use area of the neighborhood. That means your bridge club, your Bible studies, your yard workers, whatever it might be, would not be able to be granted one of these permits. They would not be able to come to your house during certain hours without being issued a $94 ticket from the government. So this is what tolls in the hands of the tyrants. And now it's not that hard to convince us after what happened with COVID. This is what happens with transportation. So next slide, please. So they actually had a bill filed. Now, this was in the 116th Congress. So this was right before COVID, 2019 to 2020, that would have created a real-time national driver surveillance program. Now, the problem with that may not sound like it's much, but let me tell you it is. It allows law enforcement to know anything and everything about every driver at just the click of a button. It's basically a database and a fusion of all your information, and it's not just your driving information. As you'll see, according to the Salem News, the bill would also give law enforcement real-time alerts on every driver. The Massachusetts governor at the time, Charlie Baker, a Republican, also called for the creation of a nationwide system to alert states when one of their drivers incurs a violation. And that would trigger a suspension in another jurisdiction. So this is basically states ganging up on drivers to be able to prosecute you from one cross-jurisdictional lines. Well, look at the next slide. The National Driver Surveillance System would then link the core highway safety databases to other systems like medical, roadway, and economic data. Okay, so this is data mining of you. Storing and tracking everything a motorist has ever been involved in would turn every driver into a suspected criminal. Okay, now it didn't pass, but that's the kind of bills we're seeing now. Happen both at not just at the federal level, we're seeing at the state level too. Next slide. Okay, so we all laugh when we see this, right? There's actually scores you see off to the side here. But your onboard vehicle systems can now allow the government to access you and do this. This is called a social scoring system. How many of you have heard of that happening in China, right? You disobey the government and you get a certain score. Once your social score drops below a certain amount, you start losing privileges or rights. And that's what they can do right now. Look at this, distraction. Okay, that's a 30, but look at his anger. Oh no, he's off the charts. He doesn't have the temperament to drive. We have to suspend his license until he can behave himself and not be frustrated while he's driving. And I'm like, wow, I'd be suspended pretty much 24/7. Okay, next slide, please. Then we have another trend happening, communities without cars. Now, some of you might think, okay, this makes no sense at all. What are they talking about? Well, it's a new housing development in Arizona. It actually bans residents from bringing cars with them. Where they live, you can't have a car. So how do they do this? It's a cul-de-sac Tempe is what it's called. 1,000-person rental development won't allow their personal cars to be driven into or parked on site anywhere. The developer negotiated their way out of the required parking spots that typically require one spot per unit by prioritizing a host of other transportation options like scooters, bikes, and rideshare programs. And that's what we're starting to see. You're going to see that in a couple slides. Here we go. Next one, please. The ban on carbon vehicles in Washington. Okay, you start to see where this is all going, right? Washington enacts a plan to ban non-electric cars by 2030. Folks, it's already 2022. This is only 8 years away. They actually passed this. Just happened in March. It claims to combat climate change, to move us away from the transportation system our grandparents imagined and towards the system our grandchildren dream of, says the Democrat governor. Okay? Cultura is the lobby group that got it passed, so believe me, I am watching for them in the Texas Capitol. Lawmakers confirmed the 2030 target is to eventually get rid of any vehicle that uses gasoline in Washington state. Next slide. So we're seeing this already in Texas. You might think, oh, okay, those are other states. They're all liberal. They're crazy, but no, it's already here. Vision Zero is Houston's plan to force us all onto what's called a road diet. It started in California. They actually called it a road diet in California, and that's what they're trying to implement here in Texas, particularly our urban areas. It's to force drivers out of their cars and into some form of mass transit or walking or biking. Nanny state big government policies of California and New York made it to Texas through our big city mayors. It was actually created originally by Swedish activists. What a shock, right? Europe just keeps getting worse. Trying to impose their socio-political ethic into transportation. The UN adopted it under its Sustainable Development Agenda, and globalists are pushing it into all of our cities. Tied it to social justice and public health to further regulate all of this. And they lobbied to tie all future increases in road funding to mass transit in order to divert all your road taxes to transit. That is the goal. So you'll see some of it. Next slide. Houston's Vision Zero includes widening sidewalks by 50 miles a year, increasing their bike lanes by 25 miles a year, slowing your speed limits. Okay, this is the one that puts me over the edge. Okay, slowing the speed limits in their city limits by lobbying the state to reduce the default speed limit on our city residential streets to 25 miles per hour and on all other city streets, 30 miles per hour. So imagine all of downtown Houston, the fastest you'll ever be able to go is 30 miles an hour. If you just live, what used to be 5 or 10 minute drive is now going to be 20 or 30 minutes to get anywhere. They also are narrowing our streets like mad, people. This is happening everywhere, all over. They just passed a huge bond in San Antonio to do 66 projects, all of them to shrink roadways. Shrink roadways. Lanes available to cars will now be deliberately slowed to slow traffic to force drivers to leave their cars and use mass transit. They're trying to, what I call is the pain tax. They're trying to come up with as many ways as possible to make driving as painful as possible, to try and social engineer you. They want you to change your behavior by government force. Okay, next one. Of course, the Houston mayor made it real easy when he admits it. When the buses and trains are going faster than the cars and the trucks, then people will exit their cars and the trucks and use the buses and the trains. That is the goal. Next slide. In San Antonio, okay, so we're just going to take the cities, right? Here we go. San Antonio has a climate adaptation plan. Number 11 was their connectivity and walkability. It said to accelerate connectivity and walkability by prioritizing the funding and construction of infrastructure for micromobility. That's another key term to look for in any of your plans, any city around the state, and I don't care if it's Decatur or not. They have them in their plans. They have it in Kerrville, Texas, folks. We had to go to the Transportation Commission to overturn our little city because they refused to listen to us when we came to the city council. They want this. They want biking and human-powered transportation to take precedence over roads and cars, okay, in areas where walking's not even viable. How many of us want to go walk anywhere on a day like today? Any takers? 103 degrees? You'll need a shower wherever you end up, right? Next slide. We also have the charge by mile tax. Okay, this was in the federal infrastructure bill that unfortunately, 16 Republicans crossed over and passed. This infrastructure bill gives the feds the go-ahead to test taxing every mile you drive. Okay, folks, you can imagine what happened, the shrieking that happened at the Hall household when I found out that this passed. That's pretty much a toll for every mile you drive. I have spent a better part of almost 20 years of my life stopping tolls in Texas, and in one swift swoop, they come in with a federal bill that will erase all of that work. So it's a pilot program now, but we all know what happens to pilot programs, right? They become permanent real fast. It's to demonstrate and gain acceptance of a national motor vehicle per mile user fee. It requires the Treasury Department to establish a mechanism to collect the toll. Now, do you think that once the Treasury Department figures out the best way to collect these user fees, that they're going to just suddenly turn off the pilot program and say, okay, we tested it, it's all good? No, they're going to come after your wallet for a good long time. They also have $105 billion in new spending on competitive grants over which Buttigieg has the final say. Don't we all love him? Mayor Pete. He's now our Secretary of Transportation. I'm sure you've heard many of his crazy comments, and I'm going to share a few of them with you tonight. The legislation would create a new federal system funding alternative advisory board. That's a mouthful. And it would advise Buttigieg. Notice that this bill did not specify any end to this advisory board. We have now created a permanent new massive bureaucracy within the Department of Transportation, which already is a bureaucracy. And it is now solely at the governance of the Transportation Secretary. No one in Congress, you can have your congressperson go up there and yell and scream all day long at the DOT. Means nothing when Pete Buttigieg has his own $105 billion pot of money to dole out at his discretion. There's not a politician anywhere that has that kind of money to just dole out at their sole discretion without answering to we the people. It's unbelievable, the amount of power they just gave him. The advisory board is very troublesome. It includes operators of toll systems, what a shock, because this is a toll for every mile you drive, advocacy groups that focus on none other than equity. You all know the key word by now. Any other representatives or entities as determined appropriate by Buttigieg. It fails to specify how the board would even create and approve its recommendations to the secretary, and it authorizes Buttigieg to carry out a public awareness campaign to increase public awareness, in other words, public acceptance of a charge by mile tax. Funding for the program is established at $10 million a year through 2026. So I have a feeling this isn't going anywhere. If we don't stop it, it's going to be here forever. It'll be a permanent new tax. And this is not one word in that bill talked about repealing the gas tax. So you're going to pay your gas tax and pay the government for every mile you drive. Next slide. So a little bit more about the Biden infrastructure bill. Safe Streets Initiative, $5 billion. It's an enormous sum for that. This is Vision Zero, and it's impossible to reach. What they mean by this is they're trying to get road deaths down to zero. That's why they call it Vision Zero. But we all know there's no way you're never going to have a single human ever have a fatality anywhere in America. I mean, that's just an impossible goal to reach. But they don't care. They're going to try and make your driving so miserable that you'll never want to get behind the wheel anyway. It requires draconian anti-car measures, zeroes out any expansions of our highways. It shrinks our road capacity for sidewalks, bike, and bus lanes. And it also included private investment. That's key for public-private partnerships. And that in Texas means toll taxes up the wazoo in the hands of Sintra. Public transit at approximately 40% of the total spend on roads. That means 40% of your gas tax is not going to go to fixing your roads. It's going to go to mass transit that you don't use. Huge diversion. Road users pay gas tax, transit users do not. There's all kinds of corporate welfare tax credits in there. It initially included human infrastructure, if you remember. Remember the Build Back Better? Then they bifurcated the bill. The big social spending was the human infrastructure part. They tried to make it all part of an infrastructure bill just to have a hook to be able to pass the student loan forgiveness, Obamacare, Medicaid expansion, and universal preschool. But now that's a new term. They created a new term, and we have to watch for that when they talk about human infrastructure and what that could mean, right? So next slide. Clearly the man's tone deaf. Let's just look at what he's done since the gas prices started to climb. He wants these funds to pay for high-speed rail in Texas. Did you know he came to Austin and says he wants that Houston to Dallas boondoggle? He says he wants to limit expansion of our highways and force people into public transit where they can force vaccine and masks, right? We can't afford gas or inflation, that's okay. Get an electric car at $40,000 to $100,000, depending on what you buy. So ultimately, that's what he means when he says that. That's my kind of iteration of what Buttigieg is saying if you read between the lines. Because remember, that's exactly what happens. What happens when you had to board an airplane all during COVID? You were subject to whatever these people, the tyrants, are willing to take your medical freedom. Mass transit means you don't have ownership anymore. And ultimately, that's what that community without cars is all about. They don't want you to own a vehicle. Notice what was okay, rideshare. So they still allow vehicles. They don't have a problem with cars, especially if it's electric. You can still have a car. You just can't own it yourself. And you can't control it. And you can't decide when and where you're going to be and how you're going to get there. Next slide. Buttigieg, you heard that this week, right? Roads are racist. I kid you not. I wish I could actually make a few jokes up here, but unfortunately it's all reality. It's called Reconnecting Communities. Remember that $105 billion that I told you was in the bill for him to just spend however he wants? Here's the first billion. First billion on the new thing. It's to reunify historically black neighborhoods that were divided many, many years ago by highways, those mean, evil highways, okay? And when the interstate highway system was developed to restore civic pride that comes with safe and beautiful green spaces. Okay, let's see what that means. The pilot program, of course, pilot. Notice the language we keep seeing. The pilot program allows municipalities to apply for funding for mass transit, green spaces built on top of roadways. So you're going to see your car lanes go bye-bye to have a nice little stretch of grass that's going to go really brown when it's 103. Known as freeway lids. I've never heard of such a term. Freeway lid or caps. They're repurposing defunct rail lines and possibly rerouting and partially removing highways. They're going to tear down our roads in our urban areas, folks, to somehow create a social justice equity, okay, of all the wrongdoing that's ever happened in the world. We're going to make it all better, just like they do for CRT for military and medical and schools. It applies to transportation too. Targeted areas. Houston, this is not good. All right, next slide. So our focus isn't about assigning blame. It's about getting caught up in guilt. It's about fixing a problem. It's about mending what's been broken, especially when the damage was done with taxpayer dollars. So he's going to spend, by golly. Make sure that he makes up for all that white guilt he has. Keep going. Next slide. Okay, at least we have a few sane people in the world, right? Cruz and DeSantis strike back. DeSantis said, I heard some weird stuff from the Secretary of Transportation trying to make roads about social issues. To me, a road's a road. Can we say amen? All right, then DeSantis also called it further evidence of wokeification of American politics and culture. Yes, folks, our roads are now woke. Senator Ted Cruz expressed similar sentiments in a tweet from last November where he says, the roads are racist. We must get rid of them then. I mean, obviously, that's the conclusion these people take away from it. So next slide. And of course, Democrats embrace this like it's candy, right? Here's this gentleman, a Democrat state rep. Now, he's not a congressman, but he's a state rep from Tennessee, if you're born here and all you see are these structures like this that are wrought iron fences and chain link fences and the noise from that interstate, what you assume is, I'm not valued because they placed this here. But if you could change that model and talk about how you were once valued in this neighborhood and we're trying to recreate that value by putting this cap here. The cap is the fuzzy landscape down the middle of your highway to make you feel better. You may change the mindset of children growing up here. Oh my goodness. And then you'll love another thing that was in the Biden infrastructure bill. I forgot to put a slide on this, but this was recently found out that was in that bill. Because remember, they pass bills like this and it takes us months, even years, to figure out what's in them. Well, one of the things that's in them, a remote kill switch. Every vehicle by 2026, that's not that far away, will be outfitted with the ability to have a remote kill switch on your car. Okay, electric vehicles like Teslas already have them, but now the government will have express access to that. So if you don't get vaxxed, turn you off. It's like a social score system, right? If you don't pay your taxes to the IRS, we're going to turn you off. They can use it for any purpose that they see fit. Next slide. TxDOT's in on the EV action. TxDOT will contract with private sector entities to develop EV charging stations all across the state of Texas. The federal law allocated $408 million just to Texas to create a network of charging systems. Folks, this is with your tax dollars for less than 1% of drivers. They're going to get $408 million. Do you know what Wise County could do with $408 million on your highways and your roads? This is an enormous amount of money to spend on this, and I am so offended by this. They just announced it. It was June 27th when this article came out. TxDOT will submit their plan to the Federal Highway Administration by August 1. TxDOT wants to start awarding contracts, building those charging stations by early next year, and continue for the next 5 years, putting this network in. Okay, folks, when ERCOT officially put out a statement this summer of how you can prevent brownouts and blackouts from happening, because our grid is that fragile, we all know it because of Snowvid, right? They put out that we have to turn our thermostats up to 80 degrees. I kid you not. This is in their statement, their public statement. They want you to turn up your thermostats in your homes to 80 degrees to prevent brownouts, but we're going to go and try and get every, 37 million registered vehicles in Texas transferred over to the electric grid that we already can't power our homes with. You won't have enough. If we were to do this, you couldn't even make an egg on your stove. These people are insane. They have lost their minds. There is no way there's enough electricity in America today for everyone who currently owns a car to do it with an electric vehicle. You cannot convert everybody into it. They know it, so that's why this push for mass transit, walking, and biking. That's why. They know it can't happen. Next slide. One thing that Andy mentioned, we worked really hard at the convention because we feel like it is needed. After all that I just shared with you, tolling is one part of the left's push against your car and your freedom to travel. We felt compelled to put something in the platform, which we had lots of precinct chairs put this in at their county level. Then it got in at the Senate district level. It made it to state. And I pretty much got to write my own wording on this. Here's what it is. Plank 63, freedom to travel. You ready? We oppose the Biden infrastructure and green energy plan that threatens our freedom to travel. It opposes a federal mileage tax as well as diversity, equity, inclusion, or other social justice policies on Texas taxpayers and drivers. We oppose all that. We oppose anti-car measures that punish those who choose to travel alone in their own personal vehicle, and oppose any measure to impose road diet mandates designed to shrink auto capacity and or intentionally clog vehicle lanes to force deference to pedestrian, bike, and mass transit options whose users do not pay gas tax. We urge the Texas legislature to protect drivers from these California-style anti-driver policies in Texas. And that passed with well over 90% of the delegates voting for this. And I'll have you know, this is interesting. Now, I know none of us read the Texas Tribune, but I did notice that their article on the Republican convention, of course, the big news was, oh, we said that Biden's an illegitimate president. Hello. 2,000 mules, anyone? So we had that. That made big news, right? In that same article, they of course, noted that we rebuked John Cornyn. They mentioned that we said homosexuality was a mental something. What do we call it? Say it. Thank you. Abnormal behavior. And they added this. This was in there. So guess what's hitting the left? What makes them shriek? This. Because this is how they get, we all know that the whole push for all this gun control is to take away our guns. And if they take away our guns, every other freedom goes with it, right? Well, that's kind of why freedom to travel has become so essential, folks. Because if they take this away from you, you won't be able to leave your driveway without their permission. That's what this comes down to. It touches everything we do. You can't go to work, you can't shop, you can't get your kids where they need to go. You can't hardly function without getting behind the wheel of your car. If they take this, they've pretty much taken your freedom from you. Next one. Here's our toll road plank. All we did was try to shrink it a little bit because, they're always trying to say we're trying to shorten the platform instead of expand it. So we tried to do that a little bit, but here's the gist of it. It's longer than this, but here's the gist. We believe tolls should come off the road when the debt's retired. Amen? So it's not a permanent tax, right? Actually, our Texas Constitution does protect us from that. I've been literally trying now for 10 legislative sessions to get that bill passed. It's been heard in committee 2 times. Never been voted on. Never even been voted on to be voted out of committee in one chamber, much less both. Okay, even though I have a bill filed in both chambers every single session for 9 straight sessions. Gotten nothing. Okay, I think it's now 10 sessions after last time. And that is in our Texas Constitution that has Article 1, Section 28, says that you cannot put in perpetuities. We have a constitutional protection against perpetuities, which is exactly what a toll forever is. It's a toll in perpetuity, never comes off. So this violates the Texas Constitution. We still can't even get it out of committee. All right? If the debt's ever restructured or refinanced, they can't change the payoff date. That's another trick they did. We got real close when our bill got heard in committee during a session. TxDOT literally went and refinanced while we're doing this, while we're in session, stopping trying to get our bill passed to say you got to take the toll off the road when it's paid for. They went and refinanced their entire toll system in Austin so that they commingled all 4 or 5 projects together so that they could push out the payoff date and say, oh, I'm sorry. If you do what Ms. Hall's asking, you won't be able to have the road paid off until, 2054. So they literally are refinancing our roads over and over and over again, lumping new projects in, then refinancing it again. It's like taking out a second mortgage on our highway system every couple years so that they can say, well, it's never truly paid for. Okay, that's how they're getting around the Constitution right now. So we have a bill that would stop that gimmick as well. We oppose public-private partnership toll roads, converting existing lanes into toll lanes, which we got into statute, by the way, in 2019. We're against taxpayer money subsidizing the toll loans, which we have done to the point of $10 billion. $10 billion in your gas tax money has gone to build toll roads and or subsidize or prop up the toll loans. Any hidden taxes, tolls, fees, and driving on our cars, we do support uniform toll collection and billing. I said that wrong. Uniform toll collection and billing process improvements, basically. We're trying to fix the problem with the toll bills. We want a cap on the fines and fees. And right now, today in Texas, how many of you know you are literally a criminal for an unpaid toll bill? Did you know that there's a criminal penalty that comes with that? It's the only one that's allowed ever in law. Consumers can't do that. They can't do that to you with your mortgage. If you don't pay it, yeah, you lose your house or you might lose your car, but you aren't a criminal. With an unpaid toll bill, they have a special little statute just for us that will take away your vehicle, it'll impound your car, block your vehicle registration, and you can actually face criminal penalties for an unpaid toll bill. So we're totally opposed to that. We want to decriminalize an unpaid toll bill. Next slide. So what are our goals for the session? This is the transportation legislative priorities. We talked about a few of them already. Remove that toll when the road is paid off. We want toll collection reform. How many of you have ever you've gone into the Metroplex or wherever, and you've gotten slapped with huge amounts of fines and fees tacked onto your toll bill? Anyone? Anyone want to fess up, right? This happens all the time. Well, let me tell you how big the problem actually is. On one of the investigative reports in the Austin area, it was one of the TV, like the TV investigators type of thing. It was an article right before the 2019 legislative session where we found out that TxDOT has put, now they only operate a few small projects in the Austin area. The rest are run by these other little fiefdoms, long story. But TxDOT operates about 3 or 4 projects. TxDOT alone has put over 2 million Texas drivers into collections over unpaid tolls for 3 projects. Okay, and they're all in the Austin area. You know what the population of Austin is? Less than 2 million. It's about 1.5 now. It used to be 1.2. Actually, it was less than 900,000. Excuse me, it wasn't even 1 million people last census. This time they're up to about 1 million, maybe a little over. So that means that's virtually like having every single Austin driver in collections over these fines and fees that are happening with the toll bill. So that's a huge problem. We've been trying to get it fixed for almost a decade. Can't get anyone to bite because we have 13 different toll entities who have huge high-powered lobbyists working against us every session. That's why we are opposed to taxpayer-funded lobbying. All right, next slide. So what are these public-private partnerships? Is there something that fills it in on the next slide, I hope? There you go. All right, so taxpayers are on the hook for the private entity's debt. Okay, the reason why it's public-private is because they don't want to risk their money, but they're more than happy to do it if it's our money that backstops the loan if the toll traffic doesn't show up. All right, I'm actually in the middle of it right now doing an open records request, trying to find out how much money the state paid Cintra during COVID. Because guaranteed that's in there. They have in their fine print of all these big, huge 1,200-page contracts that nobody reads except me. Sadly, this is my Friday night reading. At the very end, I'll talk about adverse events, including acts of God like hurricanes or in this case, a pandemic. So I am sure the state of Texas has quietly been paying Cintra for all those cars that were purposely kept off their toll road during the pandemic. They charge toll rates as high as $4 a mile. And folks, there is no cap on this. There is no cap. They can charge whatever they want. If that lane is congested, if your roadway is congested, that price will keep going up because now it's a market rate for the toll during peak hours. That's 30 to 40 bucks a day people are paying in tolls if you have to rely on that every day for work. It basically is giving private corporations the power to tax. What is that? That's fascism. Then non-compete clauses. That restricts them from expanding your free routes within a certain mile radius of the toll road. Okay, so in the Metroplex, because we can appreciate it better in a city because they're so compact, right? On, let's say, the 121 project, which was, we got that away from Cintra, long story. It's now operated by TxDOT. But when it was originally designed, they had a non-compete clause that was going to go to Cintra that would have the entire county of Collin and Denton not be able to ever expand a freeway for the 50 years that Cintra had that contract if they had gotten a hold of 121. Okay? That's what we're talking about in these contracts. It is like absolute gravy train for the privates, and for us, it's just pain and misery for the public. Lowering our speed limits on the free routes in order to drive more traffic onto the higher speed tollways. So they're messing with your speed limits on top of all of that. So that's why these public-private partnerships are so bad. And that's why we have it as our third priority, is to stop the expansion of any more toll roads, stop these public-private partnerships, which we've managed to do since 2009. Very good. And then we also want to make sure that we protect our freedom to travel from the litany, almost onslaught of bills we saw last session. Because remember, there's now a Democrat Progressive Caucus. You all know that, right? Pretty much it's all the transgenders and everybody. There's like 5 or 6 of them. And one of those gals is also big on all this social equity with transportation. She filed no less than, it had to have been 10 bills. It's on our website if you want to go look. I chronicle everything under our Grassroots Action Center page on the texasturf.org website. And Matt, if you want to start sending around the sign-up sheet, if you want to stay engaged on this, I encourage you to please do that because, as you can tell, they're coming after us. Next slide. Remember the promise that Greg Abbott gave us way back in 2014 and 2015. We're going to fix Texas roads without raising fees, taxes, tolls, or debt. Now, he's let a whole lot slide through, but we've also managed to stop more than 21 toll projects, mostly in our urban areas, but some of them not so urban. So without this, we would be you'd be covered up. You would not be able to drive anywhere in the Dallas-Fort Worth area or Collin and Denton or anywhere else for that matter without having, massive, massive amounts of toll roads. They were going to convert every single road into a toll road under Rick Perry's plan originally. So this has saved us, even though I'm not a big Abbott fan. I voted for Huff Hines. Anyway, next one. What can you do? Well, we need you to get involved. We need you to stay educated. One of the things you can do is pull out your smartphone right now. If you put in the number, where the phone number goes, the short code, 94253, where the telephone number goes, and then where you would type a text, put No Toll Texas. It does not have to be all caps, just No Toll Texas. Press send. That will sign you up for our text message alerts. FYI, both our email and our text message system, we do not give to anyone. I lock it down tighter than a drum. It's just you and I having a conversation about what needs to happen when during the legislative session and keeping everybody engaged and informed of what's really going on. Our main website for advocacy purposes is usually texasturf.org, but I also have our political action committee, Texans for Toll-Free Highways, which is tollfreehighways.com. And that one's a political action committee because guess what? That's how we can endorse candidates and get involved in political races, which is definitely necessary when it comes to these issues.